Now, in the second set of clips, you'll have seen Rambo. This is from, ironically, the movie is called Rambo First Blood Part 2 because the first Rambo movie was called First Blood. And so people just sort of called it Rambo in their heads. There are now five films in the franchise. Yeah, that's right. And the last film is, I think, supposed to be the end of it. I mean, it depends really on how long Sylvester Stallone lives and whether he needs more money or not. Yeah, I guess they'll come to him with, like, oh, Sly, do you need another $30 million, here? But what's important about this is that in the first movie, basically the plot is that a Vietnam veteran, John Rambo, comes home from Vietnam, and you never see him in country, and he's supposed to be part Cherokee. I can't remember what his tribe is supposed to be, and because Stallone looks vaguely not, it doesn't look like me, right? It doesn't look like an all white. He doesn't appear to be all white. Like you could look at his nose and you think, yeah, he could be part native. It's like, okay, whatever. I mean, remember the thing was made in 1978. I think the first film was, or 1980. Yeah, 1980. And then the second film was 1983, I think. The one I'm showing you the clip from. And it was written, ironically, by James Cameron, which is very interesting, and a Canadian. The novel was written by a Canadian, David Morrell, I think his name is. And in the first film, Rambo comes home, and he's basically hunted by a sort of sadistic sheriff. It's one of those sort of backwoods kind of, the sheriff goes after the transient veteran. And he starts shooting at him, and basically, Rambo sort of decides that he's back at war again. So, he starts to use his woodsy lore, and it takes on the sheriff and kills everybody basically, and shoots them all up. And that is why he's in the stockade, or he's at Leavenworth breaking rocks at the beginning of the second film. What's important about this beginning of this particular piece is that Richard Crenna, who plays the captain, I guess he is, or major, I can't remember what his rank is, comes to him and says, John, there's a mission, blah, blah, blah. And Crenna has been the guy who trained Rambo, and who is sort of this natural warrior. He's just this killing machine. And he says, there are guys left in country. So in other words, there are prisoners of war, and they want to get them out. Now, this was a hot topic in 1983 because Reagan used it to get himself elected in part in 80 and 84. And he said the Republicans argued that men had been left behind in Vietnam as prisoners of war, and they were still surviving in tiger cages. These are cages where the cages were bamboo cages that were built in such a way that you couldn't stand up or stretch out to your full length, so you could never completely stand up. You could sit, and you could lie down, you could curl up, but you couldn't actually stretch out. So they were considered to be torture, and they were left out in the sun, so you just bake in the heat. And I mean, it was brutal. Or they'd submerge them in water, which happens in The Deer Hunter, sort of. So that's the story, was that there were these men, who were out there getting stewed by the sadistic North Vietnamese, who had taken over the country, the rapacious communists, remember, because it had fallen. And a great deal of work was done, particularly by a guy named H. Bruce Franklin, who's a very fine, he had been a SAC pilot, or he had been part of a bomber crew, and he turned in his wings and became a peace activist in the early 60s. A very impressive guy. And okay, back to Bruce Franklin. He wrote a book called MIA, or Myth Making in America, which is about the mythical usage of the missing in action, which is what MIA stands for. KIA, killed in action, MIA, missing in action. Well, what the Republicans did was that they said there were a whole bunch of Americans who were missing in action, who had been left in Vietnam, and their job was going to be to repatriate them. So they basically were trying to fight the Vietnam War again in the 80s and win it this time. Okay, this is all the background, so that when Crenna says to the commanding officer, says to Stallone, Rambo, do you want to get out, basically, and go hunting for the guys? Of course he's going to go hunting for the guys. There wouldn't be a movie otherwise. He said, and the Stallone character, and the camera, shoots down at the barrier so we can see what's dividing them. That all that's dividing them is this fence, which is highly symbolic. That basically the Richard Crenna and the Stallone the Rambo character are basically of the same mind, and they're divided. They're both very strong men. They're both very tough. Troutman is the name of the Richard Crenna character, and that they are basically all that's dividing them is sort of the stupidity of the bureaucracy, and the film is sort of brutal about how stupid the army is, but how great the soldiers are. And people love these movies. So Rambo says, one of the most famous lines, really, of the 80s in a film. He says, "Sir, do we get to win this time?" Now, this line became so important, that's why I wanted you to see this clip, that it was echoed, it's going to echo right down through the next 10 years, where people will quote it, they will talk about it, they will say, this is the most important thing we've heard, because the feeling on the right is that the Americans were stabbed in the back by the liberals, and that who are not really Americans because they're not patriots, right? So why didn't America win in Vietnam? Because of liberals who protested on campuses, college campuses, and who stopped the war. And if they had just let the war go on, and if they had just lined up and walked across the country, and this is always the sort of myth, there was this myth that if you could just walk across the country and kill every single enemy in your way and not leave any enemies behind you, so you're not fighting a guerrilla war anymore, that you could pacify Vietnam. So remember the Ben Trey saying, where the general or whoever it is, colonel, who says, we had to destroy the village in order to liberate it or pacify it. It's the same kind of thing. So this is the way the Republicans got elected. It didn't mean they actually wanted to go back to war in Vietnam. They didn't. They were finished with Vietnam. But they used it to get elected, and it was very, very successful. So this film plugs into that, and Stallone is going to go to the White House and present Ronald Reagan with an actual, his own copy of a copy of First Blood Part 2, the Rambo movies, both Rambo movies. And why is this important? Because Reagan was an actor, right? He was a Hollywood actor. So, here's Stallone showing up and saying, I'm giving you these movies. Stallone, known to be on the hard right wing, so is Schwarzenegger, a Republican and also hard right, who's turned out to be somewhat smarter than many. And Reagan was like, this is great. So basically they made Stallone into this hero, as if he was Rambo, as if Rambo was a real character instead of this fictional creation, in the same way that John Wayne was incredibly important. And unfortunately we don't have any John Wayne because YouTube blocked it. But that's okay. As I say, I would say see The Searchers if you want to see some John Wayne propaganda, because it's really about communism, as most of those films are. Okay. And then and then there's the ending of it. So you can see how, sort of here comes the native, the Native American who comes crawling out of the woods, with all his woodsy lore skills and wipes out the sadistic, crazed Asian who's supposed to be Vietnamese, but fundamentally looks like could stand in for any sadistic Japanese prison guard that you see from World War II films. Rambo is in effect a World War II film updated to, quote unquote, updated to Vietnam. So the stuff that he's got, like these these explosive arrowheads and things like that have these, it's just also melodramatic and over the top. And I remember seeing it in the theater at the time, and there was huge laughter, but at the same time the theater was full of men. That was a late afternoon showing too, and I don't know what people were doing there. Well, then they all went out to drink because my friends and I were like, okay, let's get out of here. We went to see it as a joke. Oh boy, that was no joke. Okay, so that's the Rambo. It's just, you got to see it.